Hello and welcome to this video on the Namibia drought. Okay, and this is one of our case studies as part of the weather hazards and climate change topic that we've been studying, and it is one of the case studies we use in the physical geography paper as part of the GCSE EdXL geography syllabus. Now, drought. Okay. Definition that we might be asked to define during our exam. So, 1 minute, write down the definition for drought. Off you go. Pause the video. 3, 2, 1. Okay, you should have your definition down. Let's see what you've got. So, drought is a prolonged period of abnormally low water supply leading to a shortage of water. Remember, prolonged just means a very long time, longer than usual. Abnormally means unusually or does not fit the pattern. Okay, so that is our definition for drought. We should be getting that spot on now. All right, so the Namibia drought, we study it because it falls under this part of the GCSE specification, and it's a good example and a good comparison to the California drought. Okay, so we're thinking about how the impacts of drought on people and ecosystems can vary we're looking at a developing country this time, and how those responses to drought from individuals, organizations, and governments, what they are in a developing country. Okay, so table A, we've got 3 development indicators there. You should be familiar with them from the global development topic: GDP per capita, life expectancy, mean years of schooling, country A, B, and C. Take 30 seconds. I want you to decide from table A, using evidence that you can see, which country do you think Namibia is? Okay, have 30 seconds to have a think. Pause the video, note down some evidence for why you think that's the case. Off you go. Okay, so everyone hopefully has country A. Yeah, it has the lowest GDP per capita, significantly lower than the other 2 countries. Country B is the USA, country C is the UK. Also has a slightly lower life expectancy, and the mean years of schooling is around half than it is in the other 2 countries. Okay, so all this evidence suggests that Namibia is country A because we know it's a developing country. All right, so thinking back to those areas that are more vulnerable and higher risk from drought. Okay, there's arid climates where it's normally drier. They experience less than 250 millimeters of precipitation every year. Okay, and we've got a map of the world here, and we can see that most of those arid climates are distributed between 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Now we know, using the global atmospheric model, that 30 degrees north and south of the equator, we get this area of really high pressure where the air is sinking down between the Hadley and the Ferrel cell. If you need to revisit that concept, then go onto our YouTube video, which we have, that looks in depth at the global atmospheric circulation. Now, here we have that map of the global distribution of arid climates, and Namibia is actually in this purple circle here. So you can actually see how it has an extremely arid to semi-arid and arid climate. It's dry for most of the year round. So that's going to mean that all those people who live near or within that arid region are actually finding water sources quite limited already. So any drought is actually going to make the impacts on them and the ecosystem quite severe. Okay, so here's our map of the continent of Africa. Namibia is this country here, just north of South Africa. And within Namibia, where the Tropic of Capricorn is, go straight through it here, we can actually see some key cities within Namibia here. Okay, so let's look at the timeline and some of the reasons for the Namibia drought. First of all, I'd like us to pay attention to this map that I have here. Again, it's shaded. Okay, from white to red, it actually is less than the percentage of normal. So if it was 100%, that means that the amount of rainfall matches the normal amount of rainfall every year. However, if it goes from yellow to red, this means they're having below the normal amount of rainfall. If it's green or to blue, that means that you're actually having more than normal amounts of rainfall. Okay, and here's Namibia. You can actually see most of that country is having less than 65% of the normal amount of rainfall. Okay, significantly low amount of rainfall between October 2015 and February 2016. Okay, so drought has been affecting the southern African country of Namibia since 2011, so it's still ongoing. A lack of rainfall leading to the drying up of rivers resulted in the government declaring a state of emergency 2 out of the 3 years between 2016 and 2019. The lack of water available has led to water scarcity across the country. With around 20% of the population employed in agriculture, this led to severe impacts on people. Farming methods that make profit more quickly have, over time, replaced some of the more sustainable farming methods practices. Intense farming methods and overgrazing have had very visible impacts on the landscape. Okay, so these are all causes for the drought that has occurred in Namibia since 2011. So what have some of the impacts on the people been? Well, school days were reduced to only 3 hours, 8 to 11. Okay, so this is to try and reduce the amount of water that you're using. Remember, your school, you're going to often be fed, people using the bathroom, but also this is to allow people to try and reduce their own water use. The price of livestock fell to its lowest in 3 years, and around 60,000 farm animals have died at the start of 2019. This was made worse by a 70% loss in crop production. So prices are falling because farmers are trying to get rid of their animals. Okay, so that's going to drive the prices down. They're going to sell them for the people are going to be asking for cheaper prices because they know those farmers want to get rid of their animals because they can no longer afford to keep them. All right. The lack of rain has left around 500,000 people with access to enough food, leading to high levels of malnutrition. Malnutrition just means not having enough nutrients and food to survive and stay healthy. In 2013, around 14% of the population required urgent food assistance. Okay, so that's showing you how this is impacting on people's ability to stay healthy. What were the impacts on ecosystems? Well, 14.4 million acres of bush vegetation died due to a lack of water. Those animals that depend on this for food or shelter either die, fall ill with disease, or they just decide that they're going to migrate and actually look for that water and food elsewhere. Soil erosion increased due to increased exposure of soil to the wind and any rainfall that occurs. So any vegetation that was in that ground has died and withered away, and this exposes the soil to the wind, which then erodes that top layer of soil away. And also that loss of vegetation stores nutrients in the soil, meaning that soil quality is also declined, and that means that soil becomes less fertile. Okay, vegetation is less likely to grow where there's not enough water and enough nutrients for it to do so. Okay, so there's some of the key impacts. Now we're going to look at some of the responses from individuals, organizations, and government. Remember, malnourished just means you don't have the right type of nutrients to maintain healthy. You don't have access to that food to be able to do so. Okay, and the government might introduce new laws to try and limit that amount of water being used. Okay, the individual response. So farmers laid black plastic bags around their crops to reduce evaporation and prevent soil erosion. In one village, around 350 people left in search of water and grazing land for their cattle. Water stores had decreased, meaning there was not enough water to grow crops or feed livestock. Many were even finding it difficult to grow subsistence crops. Remember, subsistence crops are those crops that they grow just to feed yourself. So you're not growing crops to sell them on, you're just growing crops to feed yourself, and that's called subsistence farming. Now, most people couldn't afford to move on, but they were in such desperate needs that they had to root up where they were living and try and find the suitable place where they could find water sources for themselves and their farm animals. Okay, organizations' responses. Well, the Red Cross, we've heard about them before when we looked at tropical cyclones, and provided drought-resistant seeds to 4,000 farmers. So drought-resistant seeds are just those seeds that require less water to actually grow. They require very little water to actually grow into a plant that you're able to harvest. This will allow farmers to continue earning income even when periods of drought worsen. UNICEF raised $5.4 million to reach 109,000 children who were suffering from malnutrition. A Namibian non-governmental organization supported a drip irrigation system at a school in northern Namibia. They also offered to educate farmers about conservation agriculture, teaching methods that make collecting rainwater easier. So they're actually trying to teach farmers about how they could farm their crops with less water. Okay, so if there was less water available, how could they continue to do that? The government response. After declaring a statewide emergency, the president of Namibia requested $313 million of international support. Algeria donated 10 million Namibian dollars in food aid, and South Africa pledged 100 million Namibian dollars. However, because Namibia is has quite a small population, it wasn't seen as such a massive issue across the rest of the world. The Namibia government provided around $14 million for relief efforts, e.g. food and medical supplies. Meanwhile, state ministers urged farmers to reduce livestock numbers. Okay, so thinking about those responses, I want you to draw out this diagram, thinking about what was the most effective short term and the least effective short term, the same for long term, and then also thinking about the scale. How is this impact and help the country as a whole, or how would it only impact small local areas within the country? Okay, so I want you to draw that diagram out. Here, I've actually thought that the non-governmental organization teaching children and farmers about alternative and more sustainable methods. Now, this is going to be effective because it's going to allow people to continue to grow crops, feed themselves, and then sell those crops to make an income. And that's going to help them on in the long term. Okay, so have a go at doing that diagram. 3 minutes on your own, pause the video, off you go. Okay, welcome back. So you should have tried and filled out some of the categories on there, thinking about some of the responses we've just looked at. Here's a sentence started. I want you to have a go again at thinking what you think the most effective response was, and I want you to tell me why. So explain your thinking. Take 2 minutes to do that and pause the video, off you go. Okay, so I've just done a little model answer here. With my thoughts, I think the most effective response is the Red Cross, providing 4,000 farmers with drought-resistant seeds. Okay, so this is because the seeds are less likely to fail during periods of severe drought and have allowed farmers to continue with crop production. So they're able to continue to make a living, meaning they can feed their families and make an income from the sale of their crops. Okay, so we've looked at the Namibia drought in a little bit of detail there. Now, what type of exam question might you be asked relating to drought for this part of the course? Well, here's an example of a 4-mark question. You have studied a drought in a developing country. Explain 2 impacts on ecosystems. So I want you to copy that question out, and I want you to highlight or underline any keywords that you think you need to understand to be able to answer this question successfully. Take 1 minute to do that. Pause the video, off you go. Okay, so here's some of the keywords I've highlighted. We'll go through them in a minute, but first I want us to think about what some of the impacts have been on ecosystems in the 2 case studies that we've studied for this part of the topic. So California drought and Namibia drought. Now remember, we're looking at developing countries, so we need to specifically talk about the impacts in Namibia drought, but we need to know the differences between California and Namibia first. So California and Namibia, 14.4 million acres of bush vegetation died to a lack of water. Have an answer in your head. 3, 2, 1. That one is Namibia. The number of wildfires increased significantly during the drought period. More than 12 wildfires in May 2014 alone. 3, 2, 1. That one's California. 60,000 farm animals died at the start of 2019 due to a lack of water and food. Namibia or California. 3, 2, 1. That was Namibia. Soil erosion increased due to the increased exposure of soil to the wind. Is that Namibia or California? Well, that probably happened in both, but we've got that impact for Namibia where it's been happened, and that's led to further extension of arid lands. Finally, rivers were closed to fishing because young salmon were unable to survive in the warmer waters. California or Namibia? 3, 2, 1. That one is California. Okay, so the words I've highlighted in this question: drought, developing country, explain, and ecosystem. So let's just define those keywords quickly. Drought, remember, is a prolonged period of abnormally low water supply leading to a shortage of water. We went through that at the start of this lesson. We can also went through that in the California drought case study. Developing country, well, our example here is the Namibia drought. Explain, remember, we need to provide a reason for why something happened. So here we're providing a reason for why that impact occurred. Finally, ecosystem. So an ecosystem is a system that includes all living organisms in an area as well as its physical environment. So anything that supports those living organisms to survive. Okay, so how do we achieve 4 marks? Well, first, we've got to state one impact the Namibia drought had on ecosystems. We can use numbers to show the size of this impact. There's 1 mark. We'll get another mark for explaining how this impact was caused by the Namibia drought. Then we've got to explain 2. So this is stating a second impact the Namibia drought had on ecosystems. And then finally, we're explaining how this second impact was caused by the Namibia drought. And in total, that would give us 4 marks. Okay, so you have studied drought in developing country, explain 2 impacts on ecosystems. Using the success criteria here that I've used to help you out, I want you to spend 4 minutes trying to answer that question on your own. Pause the video now and have a go. Off you go in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, welcome back. You should have had a go at that question now, using some of the case study knowledge that we've learned by looking at the Namibia drought. And here I'm going to put up a model answer for us. So the ongoing drought in Namibia has caused the death of livestock. There, in the first part of 2019 alone, around 60,000 farm animals died. Low levels of water in rivers and the drying up of around 14.4 million acres of vegetation meant that these animals did not have any access to food and water sources to survive. Second impact, this drought has also caused soil erosion. The top layer of soil becomes more exposed to wind and any rainfall that occurs during a drought due to the lack of vegetation. This top layer is full of nutrients and therefore soil quality and fertility declines, making it more difficult for plants and vegetation to grow. So there's my first mark. I've stated my first impact. There's my second mark. I've explained what caused that impact, how the Namibia drought caused that impact. In green is my second impact, okay? So that's where I get my 3rd mark. And then finally, I've explained how soil erosion is caused by drought in Namibia. And then that bit in black is just a little bit of extra information. You'd probably get your 4 marks from the blue and the green that I've highlighted there. Okay, so that is a kind of roundup of the Namibia drought and then how we can actually answer and achieve 4 marks for a 4-mark question that we might face in the exam.